Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Episode 73 of the Shipping Podcast. And I will be introducing you to Matthew Tillman, the CEO of Haven. I went to Singapore, invited to go to the Shipping 2030. And when I was there, when you meet someone but you can't really remember where you have met them before, or in this case, I hadn't met him before, I've just read about him and thought about, this is a guy I want to interview, but when will that happen? He is based in San Francisco in the United States, and I'm based in Gothenburg in Sweden. But I came into this conference and someone said hello to me. And I said hello back, of course. And then I started to think, do I know this person or not? No, we didn't know each other on beforehand. We just knew about each other. But I am happy that I really had the time to sit down with Matthew. He's a busy man, as you will hear. But I would really like to do it again. So Haven, that is what I read about. When I first set out on this journey to find out about digitalization, I always got the obstacles. Everyone was telling me about them, instead of what we can do in the digitalized world. And then someone told me, have you heard about Haven? They are trying to digitalize the bill of lading, and everyone in trade or shipping knows about the bill of lading, the document that was the only way to access the cargo, and has been for hundreds and hundreds of years. So if someone could just crack that nut, things would be so very different. So when I saw Matt in Singapore, I didn't believe my eyes once I realized that it was Matt. So we sat down, and this is so interesting. I found an entrepreneur, a startup, someone who's very open and candid about how he sees the maritime industry, and relaxed about things that went wrong, and transparent about them, something we are not that used to in our industry. Well, without further ado, this is Matthew Tillman, the CEO of Haven. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Matthew Tillman, CEO and founder of Haven.
What is Haven?
Haven is a company that was started by myself and my co-founder to automate different components of global trade. The product that we launched in the market was the Haven TMS, and the Haven TMS is a transportation management system like many others that are out there. We sell the product directly to shippers. It's a SaaS-based platform that runs in the cloud. Unlike most TMS platforms, or really any other TMS platform in the space, we focused on automation and collaboration as first-order problems. So instead of asking customers to generate new documentation, generate shipping instructions, we automatically generate those types of documents and then help the carriers work directly with the customer in a safe environment, which is actually where the name comes from. That's why we called it Haven. We wanted it to be a safe place for traders to trade.
So we're talking about documents like bill of ladings and things like that?
Yes. So everything from the shipping instruction, purchase order shipping instruction, bill of lading, booking confirmation, clear down to the very end where you get an invoice from the carrier, and you can get that invoice directly in the system from the carrier. And so now you have streamlined auditing throughout the process.
How did you come in contact with the shipping industry?
Well, I wrote artificial intelligence software, or managed the development of artificial intelligence software for about 15 years. I had a couple of startups in the advertising space that used AI to basically streamline workflows of ad agencies and things like that. After selling my last company, I came to Asia, and I was going to procure freight for a truck that I was going to send to South America so I could drive the Pan American Highway. And while I was in Asia, I started talking to a friend of mine, and he and I decided that we could solve some issues with regards to the supply chain just based on the fact that the disruption that occurs when you're trying to just do a simple container booking is actually pretty phenomenal and high touch by a lot of different parties. So we saw that as a major opportunity to automate that portion of the trade. I ended up never sending my truck to South America. because it was so difficult for freight forwarders to respond with a booking confirmation, and it was so expensive. And so what we ended up doing was we raised money from the Singapore government and from top-tier VC firms, and went about meeting everybody we possibly could in the space to learn as much as possible about global trade.
And how long ago was this?
This was in 2014, April of 2014.
So now I can get the view of someone who's new into the business.
Yes.
How do you find the maritime industry?
I find it tremendously complex due to the number of people involved and the number of systems and the number of processes involved. However, it's very straightforward to understand from an overall, kind of from a generic standpoint. At the end of the day, you have to move goods from point A to point B. And I'm starting off with a little bit of background because I am from a trucking family, but you have to move goods from point A to point B. And there's a lot of different parties that accept risk in the course of that movement. And so you have to figure out who has their hands out for which payment at which point in time. And once you figure that part of the system out, it becomes a lot more clear to understand why people say the things they do and why they present the way they do publicly.
So how have you been received as a company?
I think initially there was a lot of skepticism because we were one of the first companies to come into the space, one of the first VC-backed companies to come into the space. And, our first value proposition even was totally wrong. Like our first product was everything was totally wrong about it from an industry perspective. But
why? Tell me.
Because what we thought, like everyone else that comes into the space, is we thought we're going to build Sabre for shipping, or Expedia, as it's more commonly known, for shipping. Everybody says the same thing. And you get into it and you realize that that's not actually how pricing in the industry works at all. And so I think we came into market and just started telling everyone this and socializing. And we didn't try to keep anything secret, just socializing the concept. And we got a lot of great feedback from the shipping lines themselves on why that doesn't work. And we finally got to the truth about why it doesn't work, which was relatively difficult to get to the truth in the maritime industry, as you know. And so once we finally had that bit of information, we could start to tailor the system. So we had customers, though, that definitely wanted that buyer experience, but they knew that they also didn't want the exact experience of an Expedia, because this is not a plane ticket. You're booking 50,000 plane tickets a year. You always have buyer economics, right? You always have the ability to leverage your volume. And so that changed the platform considerably. Over the course of that first year, so 2014 to March 2015, we launched the platform, the initial version, at TPM Long Beach. And it was met with a great deal of resistance from the carriers, because I think everyone wanted to know how we got the rates into the system and which trade manager we were talking to and things of that nature. And we basically built that product specifically to do two things. One is to get the carriers to come to us, because we couldn't afford the plane trips all around the world and all the partying that is involved when you have to do BD with carriers. We couldn't afford it. So that's number one. They were willing to take an audience with us and talk to us about their business. And they were super helpful early on, which was, I think, not expected, but it was really, really helpful because they saw that we were open to receiving feedback. And the second thing that it did is we always want to be a software company and not a broker. This industry has plenty of brokers. It's going to get new brokers coming up every day because the technology is getting better and better. But Haven didn't want to get into the business of brokering and arbitraging customers and increasing adverse selection and doing all these other things. So we wanted to stay a software company. And so the way that you do that is, if you can afford to, you capture as much information about trade as possible. And we use that data to automate a number of the operational processes that exist in the space today. And things that people weren't thinking about were, when you sit down as an operations person at a large shipper, your first thing in the morning is not request a quote, right? Requesting a quote is not the most interesting thing out of your business. The most interesting thing is I need to find the email somewhere in this pile of emails, 300 deep, that's going to prevent me from missing a gate check. That's the most important email, or missing review of bill of lading, or whatever it is. And so there's all these actions that people take. And we focused on using the data from that system, the relatively embarrassing first system that we put out, in order to automate the remainder of the trade. And so that's actually how we got started that first year.
Today we have been attending the Shipping 2030 in Asia, and you were asked, is this a real thing or is it a bubble?
Yeah.
The digitalization and all the new and the startups and could you please talk a little bit about that?
Where is it coming from?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is wild to see the industry kind of have so much insecurity about itself and its ability to adopt new technology, because it's actually done a relatively good job. It was famous, in fact. Andy Grove, in Only the Paranoid Survive, he wrote, the CEO of Intel, wrote about how good of a job the shipping industry did at adopting technology in the 80s. And they got a 10x multiple on growth because of that, right? If you look at container volumes over the course of time, you'll see a huge spike in the 80s after they were able to do documentation electronically, or at least book the ships electronically. So it was a huge boom. And then there's a second boom in the late 90s, early 2000s, where Go Cargo and CargoSmart and all these companies tried to become marketplaces. And so there's this big boom at the time. Intra originally was developed as kind of a non-profit marketplace owned by Maersk Line. It was this fascinating kind of story about this business. And they used really expensive technology, really expensive people, and they had a really long road to market. And we kind of looked at both of those things and said, okay, well, they adopted maybe too early that second time, or they didn't force the companies to bring enough to the table, bring enough value to the table. So when I look at the new kind of shipping boom, I look at it and say, well, we've got all this past experience to learn from the mistakes of others. Let's not repeat a GT Nexus. Like, let's not repeat a CargoSmart. Let's think about what do the carriers need? What do the customers need? And then ignore all the other noise in the space. And I think the technology is cheaper now. The investment dollars are bigger. The quality of the people are a lot better now from a development perspective. And so I think that it's not so much a boom yet, but I think it will be. I think it will be a lot of money that comes into this space because it's a big space.
And it's so interesting because I think that the industry doesn't see itself as something that someone else would be interested in that way.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what happened to this industry, but it's like this and energy are the two most important industries on the planet. And it's like we're very insecure about our position in the world. But the reality is, like, you kind of take the internet for granted, and you also take the shipping world for granted. And it's the same kind of network. One's a network of atoms and one's a network of electrons, but they are literally on the exact same lanes in the ocean, and they follow one another. And they're linked forever. So I hope that this industry starts to learn that it's an important player, and
on the other hand, you can turn it around and say that we think that we are the center of the world. We are just not telling anyone else about it.
Perhaps, I guess that's
we
how
heard
trade
that
works.
Today. It's like we are egocentric because we know it all, and we don't have to tell other people.
Yeah, I think sharing has not been encouraged in the world of trade. And that makes sense, right? Because 60% of all capacity in the world is sold through intermediaries. And intermediaries make money by arbitraging the lack of information their customers have. That's how an intermediary works in every industry. So that's not like unique to shipping. And so if you're an intermediary in this space and you control 60% of flow, you don't really want to go shout from the rooftops all the things that you've learned. Conversely, it's relatively easy to acquire someone that's been a fairly senior person at an intermediary in this industry because it's such a financially driven industry. So you can learn a lot about the space very quickly by just hiring great people, which is relatively easy to do in the space.
So how do you see the future for shipping in general?
In general, I think that it will eventually experience the same thing that finance experienced, which is a massive consolidation of intermediaries, so consolidation of the supply side, and an increase in speed and efficiency demanded by the customer. And that's what happened in finance. Contracts used to clear on futures exchanges at around $1.12 a contract. And within 3 years, from 2000 to 2003, they went from $1.12 to 12 cents a contract. So all that margin has to come from somewhere, and it usually comes from increasing operational efficiency through technology, which is what happened in finance. And the other thing that happened in finance was an increase in customer satisfaction. And so I have high hopes for the industry that there will be an increase in customer satisfaction above and beyond where it is right now.
How could this industry become more visible?
Well, one, by sharing. I think, it's hard to sit on a position and wait for the other guy. It's a Nash's equilibrium. And you don't want to have the other guy be the first, and you don't want to be the first. And so you're in this like awkward situation. But I think you have to start sharing openly and publicly. And it's really hard to do that if your business is arbitraging asynchronous information. but you have to do it. Eventually it'll have to happen for the industry to become more visible. I think the other thing that we could see in this industry is the programmatic addressability of supply. So in the finance industry, it was all a bunch of Wolf of Wall Street style traders, go into strip clubs and parties and all sorts of other nonsense for a long time. And then what happened is that went away in a very short period of time in the futures and Forex market, because all the data previously held in the head and the gut of this classic Wall Street trader type became available directly and electronically from the exchanges. And once the data was democratized within the organization, systems can make purchasing decisions a lot faster and usually a lot better than humans. And that happened over a very short period of time. And I think the same thing will eventually happen in this industry.
I totally agree.
Is that right?
Yes.
Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a drive from the carriers to pull the most margin possible out of their service, because rising labor, and if one of your biggest costs is labor costs and asset costs, rising labor costs are going to prevent you from selling at the margin you're currently selling the product for. So you have to get that margin somewhere else, and that has to come from automating those systems, automating those processes, and focusing on growth instead of just kind of maintain. Especially now that customers want to skip the intermediaries. If a customer owns a warehouse or if they own trucking services, they can skip an intermediary and go straight to a carrier. Well, now the carrier has to service that customer, and that's very expensive. That's a lot of steak dinners and martini lunches and things of that nature.
But we're also there are so many things happening in our industry now. Is the generation shift as well. Mm-hmm. And we got all this new tech coming along, and we are, as you say, attractive to others nowadays. So yeah. Lots of things happening now, and I think we will become even better once we're out on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, most industries have to go through that process of kind of shedding the old way of thinking. We try to make it very easy for our customers to adopt the platform. But even for our customers, it's a bit shocking when they license the platform and they realize that we don't sit in the middle. There's still this forwarders or so the way that everybody's always done things. And so we show up and we say, no, it's $150,000 a year and you can use as much or as little as you like. We don't really mind one way or the other. It's this jarring kind of concept for our customers. And it's just so different the way things have been done historically. We're not trying to take advantage. And I think no one in the industry really sells a value proposition where the customer doesn't think, oh yeah, but what about, X, Y, and Z? Like, no, we literally don't do any of that. We don't have time for it. And it's just a bit shocking to the customers. It's certainly shocking to the carriers. I'll still get people from CMA came up to me at the conference and they were like, wait, so how does it really work? I'm like, well, I'll just show you. And I showed them and they're still like shocked that they're just talking directly to their customer in the platform. They thought there was somebody in the middle the whole time. So
I think that is so exciting. Who would you like to listen to? Who do you think I should meet the next time?
The next time? It's interesting. I think there's a few people that we've talked to in this space that just gave us so much great information about how the industry worked. And they're from the industry. So Pasquale Parmesano from, I think I'm getting the last name right, from MSC, the MD of MSC. He, I'll tell you a funny story actually, because I think if he ever listens to this, it would crack me up, him hearing this. But he was one of the first shipping lines I ever met with, MSC. And I've never told this story publicly actually, so we'll see what happens. I went to their office in Geneva. I was introduced by a friend of mine at Apex Maritime, who you should definitely talk to. Kevin Bolger at Apex knows more about the business than most of the people I've ever run into. Great guy. So introduces me to Pasquale, and I show up in Geneva at their office, and I'm kind of like wearing what I always wear because I'm from California, right? And he walks out, looks around, and sees me and says, I think he said, well, I thought there'd be more of you. And I was like, this is a great introduction to shipping, and proceeds to just tell me why it's a bad use of my time, and tells me, how the industry's got all these problems, and tells me about all the problems the industry has, and gives me tons of feedback on our original idea. And honestly, it was the most valuable meeting I've ever had in my career, let alone in the shipping business. And I thank him greatly for it, but he is a blast to talk to if you've never talked to him. So I highly recommend that. He and Kevin Bolger at Apex, I think, were my two favorite interviews so far.
Okay. We'll see what I can do.
Great.
Thank you very much for taking the time. It was really a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
And best of luck.
Thank you very much. You as well.
Thank you, Matthew. I think it's so interesting to hear that you set out to build an Expedia for freights. but realize that that was not in demand. Also, that you are sharing that you had no knowledge when you started this and that you got it wrong. I can honestly tell you that it's not a lot of times that I have heard someone admit publicly that something went wrong, but we've all been there. Did I say that I met Matthew on the 6th of September, just in case someone is wondering, when did this interview take place? I have got a few more startups lined up for you. And it's really interesting to hear how people from the outside view us as an industry. We need to become more confident and know that we are attractive. That is what I take from this interview. As we are approaching a new year, of course I'm thinking about goal settings, but also reviewing 2017. What happened during this year? Well, I did deliver a new episode every other Friday. Sometimes it was really stressful, and sometimes I just enjoyed it. I passed the milestone of 100,000 downloads. Last week I was accepted into Spotify. I've met so many wonderful and helpful people. And now I can see more and more companies within the maritime industry moving into the podcast space. And that is so much fun. And they want to know how to do things. And I know. Also, the podcasting industry is developing. There are things happening there as well. It's so interesting to be a part of a new industry, but still with one foot left in the old one. So goal settings for next year. Yeah, I started by updating my media kit. Because that is what people want to know. What are you doing? How many people are you reaching? In how many countries do people download your podcast? Well, I can tell you it's more than 166 countries now. My goal for 2018 will be to get more companies to understand that the marketing industry is also changing. If you want to support what I do, if you find it interesting to listening to my podcasts and want to contribute financially, go to patreon.com/shippingpodcast. I can see that some people have already started. It's so much fun. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. From me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.